Thank you so much for joining us for the second part of the series. So the first part, we presented Cortex. So today we're going to be presenting Strata. And at the end of today's session, that's when we are also going to run a quiz and consolidate the marks from the last session and award our winner. I think I can hand it over to Kyle, but you're free to send any questions in our Q&A box or chat box, and we'll be able to assist you. Kyle, over.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thanks everyone. I do apologize. This is a quick one, I think, before we carry on. There is a lot of content today, so we obviously want to cover Strata, which encompasses quite a few of the technologies today. So some being obviously the next generation firewall. It's going to be the SD-WAN component, part of what used to be CloudGenix, which is now Prism SD-WAN. And we're also going to be covering something I thought I'd put into the slide deck as well, is the P400 Series as well, which is something I definitely want to mention in case some of you may have missed the launch a lot earlier this year, just so that you can see what we do have out there for the smaller enterprises, which is quite good. But I do apologize if I do talk too quickly and you may have missed something. So thanks, Lindsay, for doing the recording and stuff as well. I think that will definitely help out. If you guys do have any questions after the session, please get hold of the data group IT guys, and I'll definitely point you guys in the right direction. More than capable to assist. But let's get started. My name is Kyle Benton. I am the channel systems engineer for the SADC region. So naturally, obviously, our role as part of the actual channel team, number one, is obviously I've got my colleague as well, which I work very closely with, who is Shaneli Calder as well, who is the channel business manager. So myself and Jen obviously work very closely with the focus partners in the SADC region, as well as obviously assisting the disties to make sure that the other partners and any of the other partners within the region are more than capable to be able to support the products and sell the products as well, which is quite nice. And this is some great initiative that the DGIT team has also obviously put forward to help you guys understand the technology sector as well a little bit easier. And actually, yes, just like Lindsay said, some awesome fun at the end of this when we do the last bit of the cahoots to see who wins the prize at the end of it, right? That's one of the biggest things that we want to look at. So the first section that I want to do is the next generation firewall, which is actually the bread and butter that we've had in our security stack for many years, right? And I mean, you guys have all attended the Prisma Cloud stuff, the Cortex stuff as well. There's the Prisma Cloud stack as well. So you guys would see, especially if you have access to the partner portal or the website, that we're not just a firewall company. Yes, that's pretty much where it all started, but there's so much more behind it. Now, where did it all obviously start with, right? Is it any perimeter side of things, whether it's at a branch, a data center, whether it's in the cloud today as well, especially if you're looking at infrastructure as a service or doing some kind of containerized environments through a Kubernetes cluster, for example, and you're doing something very specific like that, there is still a need for a next generation firewall. And why is it quite important? Because one of the largest trends when it comes to any kind of security issues within any businesses, and I think more so today, especially with many organizations looking at hybridized working environments, is that data is pretty much sitting everywhere now. I mean, data is sitting on my laptop now. I'm sitting in Cape Town now while we're doing business here now, where we normally work from Johannesburg. I could be working from my laptop or in home, or I could be using my phone to do any kind of working. I could connect to anything from anywhere essentially. And actually the problem with that is because of this increase in the security landscape, it becomes a lot easier for the bad guys to start targeting us and looking for those vulnerabilities, especially since organizations, because of this massive increase in the security landscape, is that multiple different organizations have got multiple different point solutions, looking at proxy solutions, cloud solutions, mobile solutions, whatever it is. And to try and keep up with all of that technology, you do lead to a point where it becomes a security skill shortage for them to continuously, train the engineers to be able to look after this. And this is kind of where, the bad guys start taking more advantage of that side as well. Now, I mean, this is just a great example of what a normal networking environment looks like. And I mean, it could be whether it was a few years ago or today, it really is something that is changing quite rapidly on a day-to-day basis. I mean, we could have firewalls that are sitting at a small branch office, at a head office, a data center. We may still be running some kind of MPLS environment, whether a customer is looking at augmenting MPLS or removing MPLS and using an SD-WAN type solution where they're using multiple different public internet connections to create an MPLS type of environment, whether they've moved applications into the cloud, or whether it's using infrastructure as a service and hosting their own applications, using software as a service, like in the Office 365s, the Salesforces or whatever, looking at some kind of SaaS security solution as well, which is also, again, multiple different solutions, again, mobile solutions with me as a user sitting at home. How do I do the protection of that user? Because there's no physical firewall sitting there. So do we look at a VPN solution? Do we look at a proxy solution? There's so many things behind this. And the problem with all of these different techs that keep getting used is naturally what happens is none of this is naturally integrated. And a lot of these different technology solutions out there have to kind of be sticky taped together to try and see how we can actually get things to work. And the problem is with that sticky tape is like taking a fish tank, right? You've got a hole in it and you use a little bit of tape, that tape is going to start seeping water. So we're going to land up with some security gaps in the end of it, which is quite a big problem. Sorry. Now, the other side of it is that it becomes quite complex to look after. And this kind of leads on to the whole problem with skill shortages and stuff as well, is that security teams today, which I've seen quite often, are starting to shrink and maybe moving into other different environments or getting out of the IT industry, or organizations are not keeping up with the amount of products that they need to look after, and things become too complex. And the more we're trying to stick things together and the more we're trying to support it, it leads to massive user experience issues. And naturally, when we start bringing in user experience issues, we're naturally going to have less production in any kind of organization as well, which is a big problem. Now, this is where, from a security platform perspective, in our Strata stack, it is something that's quite unique, is that we obviously have the ability of being able to do the security components from whether it's the branch, the mobile users, whether it's even taking the physical component of that firewall, making it virtualized, putting it in a containerized environment, whatever it is, just being able to take our entire technology stack, ensuring that it is natively integrated, speaks the same language at the end of the day. The security policies that are pushed across the environment, no matter what the platform is consistent, which is quite important as well. And naturally, obviously, something that any customer would look for is looking at the best in class, not just something that is good enough, but something that does everything and it is the best at what it does, which is incredibly important when any customer needs to look at their security environments. Now, the great thing when it comes to our Strata environment, and I mean, again, this is broken up into multiple different components, but specifically when it comes to our next generation firewall side, is that we can obviously break this up into multiple different types of form factors. So one obviously being the hardware component side of it, which is our PA series, which is something that is from the 200 series or 400 series and works its way up to the larger chassis-based platforms. Customers looking at the VM series, for example, if they're looking at putting it into the on-prem cloud-based infrastructure as a service or hypervisors, whatever it is, customers that are looking at Kubernetes type clusters where they need a purpose-built firewall put into the actual application cluster, not having something that sits outside that only gets the outside visibility, but is purposely built to fit inside the Kubernetes application cluster to have the ability of looking at the entire application traffic of every single one of the pods in that environment and not just the node IP addresses, essentially. So something that's very specifically built for that. And that's something that we have that's over and above of any of the other technology providers out there. The other side of it, which is quite popular now and something that's looked at quite a lot, is not just necessarily taking or having the ability of taking these hardware appliances or virtual versions of the hardware appliances, but what if I'm a customer that already has routers or SD-WAN appliances sitting in my environment and I have multiple different remote users as well? How do I give them the same branch-like experience? In that example, we have Prism Access, which is the cloud delivered firewall as a service or next generation firewall as a service, which essentially does the same thing as the hardware appliances in the VM series, but as a cloud delivered platform. So what that essentially means is having a customer buy into Prism Access, which is obviously a tenant which is allocated to them, where they could use a global protect agent on their laptops and PCs that connect into Prism Access, where you can manage the security policies in the actual cloud environment to the same as what you have in a branch, for example. And that environment is scaled depending on the number of users or branch connections or whatever it is, exactly how it should be done, right? As a cloud delivered service. So the more you add to it, the more it needs to scale on top of it. And this could be done for, again, like I mentioned, for remote services, as well as, say, for example, customer branches that have multiple different SD-WAN appliances that could tunnel into Prism Access. In that case, you could manage both remote users as well as your cloud delivered services, your branches into one single platform, which is quite nice. Now, this is kind of what introduces the whole panorama management side of it. So, Carl, what if I've got hardware appliances sitting in my branches, and I've got VMs that are sitting in my data center, and I'm also, in my data center, I've got these Kubernetes clusters, and I'm running, multiple different applications in it, where I'm running Prism Access from my remote branches. How do I manage this massive infrastructure with all of these different firewalls? And the great thing about this is that you can use the Panorama management platform, both physical and virtual, that gives you a single interface to be able to manage your customers' environments. Very important, again, simple, consistent, so not leading to any other security gaps, which is quite big. Now, it's great that we have the ability to be able to manage all of this stuff, but where does the actual security component come from? And this is where we have these multiple different subscriptions that can be added to the actual Strata next generation firewalls, right? So starting off with our threat prevention software, URL filtering, which is all introduced on the devices to do any kind of network level antivirus, IPS, looking at application control using our app ID functionality, doing Active Directory or IDP functionality, so identity providers, integrating into them, whether it's a on-prem AD environment, whether it's Azure AD, whether it's a SAML provider, for example, is an Okta or a Ping ID as well, being able to integrate that into the firewall, DNS security. And obviously, the nice thing about the introduction to PanOS 10.0 last year, we introduced the embedded functionality of IoT security on the actual firewall itself. So being able to pull an asset registry of what IoT devices are in the environment, and also doing that on-device enforcement on the actual devices themselves, which is quite nice. Obviously, Wildfire has been there for a long time, which is more of a cloud-delivered service, or more popular as a cloud-delivered service or security service for unknown kind of vulnerabilities in the environment. So if we didn't have obviously the signatures and the hashes within the database, how do we have the ability of being able to protect the environment? So Wildfire was that sandboxing component in the cloud, where if we found something that we didn't know about, we sent it into Wildfire. Wildfire ran the exposure, imploded to see what it did from an application perspective, networking perspective, and then told the firewalls, listen, this is something that's bad, make sure that you block it. And the great thing is, because once it's tied into Unit 42, it tells the entire world to update the Palo Alto infrastructure to make sure that we have got this type of level of security on the devices. Now, with PanOS 10.0, we've been doing that before that, right? But with PanOS 10.0, we brought in the machine learning functionality on these devices. So having the ability of being able to do this, instantaneous type of protection for unknown levels of malicious traffic immediately in real time. Where previously we used to brag about we could do this in less than 5 minutes, having that machine learning functionality on PanOS 10.0 from last year, we have the ability of being able to do this with, whether it's looking at JavaScript type things within a web security functionality, or looking at portable executables, so PowerShell scripts or DLLs or whatever it is directly on the actual device with files in movement, and being able to protect the entire network with unknown protection in real time very quickly, which is quite nice. The other side of it is bringing in the DLP functionality as well, looking at SaaS inline security, which is something that was introduced in 10.1, which is something that was launched this year, which is something I'll cover a little bit later as well, where SaaS inline security kind of ties very nicely into our Prisma SaaS solution that we provide as well, where Prism SaaS does the data at rest through SaaS environments, where we can do data in movement on the actual device. So looking into SaaS applications, being able to do the identification of this, of the data that's moving through the actual traffic to these SaaS environments and doing the security behind that as well. The GP functionality being the global protect, so giving customers the ability to have a VPN platform where they could use the global protect agent on their devices to VPN into the Strata gateway, into the environment using an SSL VPN, IPsec, whatever it is, as well as obviously using global protect for Prism Access security as well, which is quite nice, as well as the SD-WAN subscription on top of the actual platform, which gives, obviously, again, this is next generation firewall and the SD-WAN subscription onto the device. So in that case, you have SD-WAN and security on a single device, which is quite nice. Something we've been doing for quite a while as well, which is obviously being improved through the multiple different PanOS versions as well. Now, we've got multiple different use cases on why would we use certain firewalls and types of form factors at the end of the day. Some of these would be looking at a data center, for example, where customers may sweat certain assets to a point where they've almost run over certain subscriptions, or the device isn't necessarily updated quite often. So in this example, this is where we are quite good at it, where customers may move an older appliance with really bad subscriptions on it, or not really necessarily renewed subscriptions on their devices from the data center into a disaster recovery site, for example. In that case, we could assist with, well, we don't have to put in physical tin. I mean, again, we could put in physical tin in a data center where we can look after the entire facility through the perimeter. We could look at virtual machines, where customers could look at a physical versus a cloud-like experience using these virtual machines to do the protection as well. And like we mentioned, if customers are looking at a Kubernetes type of environment where they need visibility and security into those multiple application pods, we also give that as well, which is quite nice. In this example, we've had a customer that tried to do the same thing, where they were looking at perimeter security in their data centers, but they also needed to have a hybridized cloud-like experience, where in the data center, the perimeter was looked after by a physical firewall, but they also hosted multiple VM series type firewalls to look after certain hosted environments within their own data center. So to look at a cloud-like experience, which is quite nice. Another good example of this is looking at how campuses function. And campuses could be either both educational type campuses as well as medical campuses, for example. And a lot of these different facilities often looked at something called a UTM. UTM being a Unified Threat Manager. Now, this is something that most of you may have still remembered, or a lot of these different vendors, security vendors out there still push that word, UTM. Basically what the Unified Threat Manager was back in the day was we had to run different proxy hardware where we did network level antivirus. We had a separate appliance to do that. If we did IPS or IDS or whatever it was, we had separate appliances that had to run this as well. Now, one day someone was quite clever and they decided, well, we can take these multiple different devices, squish it into one appliance and call it a Unified Threat Manager. Now, the problem with that is taking all of these different components and squishing them together, even if it's the same vendor, creates a huge problem with it. And that big problem behind that is that a lot of these different components or security components behind this are all written in multiple different coding languages, and they don't necessarily talk the same thing or integrate correctly. Now, this is where a UTM and a next generation firewall is completely different, right? Is where a next generation firewall component has the ability of having all of these UTM components natively talk to each other in the same language, they all do the same thing, whether it's from logging side, whether it's doing security, consistency across the network, whatever it is. Now, that's the biggest thing. It's obviously security as a consistency component, and making sure that there's no security gaps based on 5 or 6 different languages that need to talk to each other on the same platform. Now, one good example of this was, we've had many examples of this within Africa as well, not just obviously across Europe and America, is where we've had the ability to have well, one example of this was a customer that had which was a medical customer, which had multiple different campuses spread across a large environment and across geographically, which is quite important to them. In that example, they didn't want physical firewalls that were broken up into, into the larger on-site campus. So in that case, they bought a larger appliance from us, being one of the larger chassis devices. And I mean, it could be anything smaller as well. It doesn't necessarily have to be the chassis component. Now, what they did was they took the actual physical firewall and broke it up into something called virtual systems. And in those virtual systems, it basically is a virtualized version of the physical firewall. So what I mean by that is, if you've ever seen the movie Inception, where there's a dream in a dream, it's the same thing. A virtual firewall inside of a physical firewall. So what they did was they had this physical firewall which had multiple virtual systems on top of it that looked at different locations within the campus. So the west side of the campus was looked after one specific virtual system, and the east side was looked after with another virtual system. Now, the benefit of that is that on a physical appliance, each of those virtual systems can be independently managed from each other. So that means campus west does not affect the policies and security of campus east, for example, which is quite nice, but all being done on a single interface. And that's something a lot of customers have looked at. Another example of how could we do this for a retail or branch-like experience, I think retail is one of the great examples behind this, is multiple examples. So one example of this, I would say, which is the more popular side of it, is looking at, well, I've got already, I'm a retail chain. I've already got SD-WAN appliances in there. We've already moved to this type of scenario. I've got this thing that is connected to 3 different internet links, whether it's LTE, satellite, it's looking at fiber, whatever it is, and it's doing the SD-WAN side of it. And it's a basic stateful type firewall, but we want to add a next generation firewall to it. Now, does that mean that they would have to buy a physical firewall? Yes, I mean, they could do that. They could get a virtual firewall, whatever it is. But the easiest component to sell into a customer like this would be looking at Prism Access. In that case, there is no host that would need to be looked at from a virtualization perspective. They wouldn't have to look at a physical firewall to add into the tiny cabinet in the retail chain. In this case, they add Prism Access to this solution. So Prism Access would then integrate into the SD-WAN solution, whether it is the CloudGenix or Prism SD-WAN solution we have now, or a Silver Peak, a Viptela, Meraki, whatever it is, that integrates directly with Prism Access, where we can provide that cloud-delivered next-generation firewall as a service. So that means they don't have to make more space for the next-generation firewall protection. And that's a great example of what a lot of customers would need to look at today. In fact, my favorite one. The other component which a lot of partners seem to be looking at, or any kind of managed services provider seems to look at, is creating what is generally looked at around the industry as a branch in a box, where they have a physical, what we call virtualization as a function, or network virtualization as a function, which is a physical appliance which could act as a hypervisor, which could have a file system on it. It could act as an AD on the device itself for identification for users at the branch. It could have a virtual SD-WAN appliance to do the SD-WAN and routing functionality of the branch as well. And obviously, quite naturally, is also adding our virtualized version of the firewall, so the VM series firewall onto it, which creates this branch in a box type of environment. Everything being virtualized on a single appliance. And this is something we could provide to customers quite easily, which is quite nice. Both SD-WAN as well as the firewall and the security component. Now, obviously, we've had hundreds and hundreds of different customers looking at this, where, we, especially from a retail perspective, where, again, like I mentioned, they've got an SD-WAN appliance. We've just added our Prism Access on top of it, and they get their branch-like experience, whether the workers are working remotely, the employees are working remotely, or whether it's sitting at the actual branch itself. I no longer have to have this firewall that sits under the desk anymore. We just connect either through a global protect agent into Prism Access on these actual points, on the sales points, or I suppose also through the SD-WAN appliances as well. Obviously, quite importantly as well, like I mentioned a good few times, is mobile users as well. So not just having, being able to backhaul all your traffic through a data center. So obviously, still happens today. A lot of customers still look at this, where they have an SSL VPN or an IPsec VPN agent on their laptops. Again, we can also provide this, which connects into a physical or virtual appliance that sits at a data center, a head office, or a branch office. And from there, their internet traffic could be backhauled through that firewall to protect the internet traffic. Or they could do split tunneling. So, only corporate information goes through the actual VPN and non-corporate information goes out of it. Now, it becomes a problem because, well, the user could be accessing corporate data and, obviously downloading malicious traffic and browsing stuff that they shouldn't necessarily be browsing while they're still connected to the corporate assets, which is a big problem. Now, yes, you can stop the split tunneling behind it, but that means they still have to backhaul through the data center firewall. Now, a great example of being able to get rid of this is obviously looking at Prism Access. So this is where they could run the Global Protect agent on their machines, have the ability of being able to connect to any one of the point of presences, data centers that we as Palo Alto Networks obviously provide. So an example, we've got a few within Africa. In South Africa alone, we've got 2 different points of presences in South Africa, Central and West. There is a list on the partner portal that shows you the amount. We've got a lot. I think it's over 150 now point of presences around the globe, which is quite a lot. So in that example, if I try and connect into my Prism Access environment, I would look at, well, what is the closest gateway that I could connect to based on latency, for example. And it'll get you access to that gateway as part of that tenant, download, obviously, the correct security policies that we would get access to, and quite easily, obviously, get protected as if I'm sitting behind a firewall sitting at the branch, which is quite nice. Right, so how do we see this as a normal user at the end of the day? So one example of this is looking at Bob, for example. So Bob in this example, which is very similar to how myself and my colleagues work, and I think a lot of yourselves do as well, is being able to work on multiple different devices from multiple different locations, right? And also all over, no matter where you are and what you're accessing from, having the ability of being able to access all of the applications no matter where they sit, whether it's an infrastructure as a service, software as a service, something sitting at the data center, no matter what it is. Now, something that's quite important when it comes to this, and I think any IT person would look at this and go, well, what is the most important thing behind this is, well, identity, right? Especially when it comes to a zero trust type of environment. Identity is huge. So in this example, naturally on the actual Strata gateways or next generation firewalls themselves, we run something called user ID, which integrates into multiple different IDPs, so, identity providers, whether it's, again, like I mentioned, whether it's internally, whether it's in the cloud, no matter where it is. So no matter which device we use, we have the ability of being able to identify Bob as that user, no matter what device they use, or no matter where they're sitting, whether it's sitting behind a Palo Alto gateway at the office, whether it's sitting behind Prism Access that they may be accessing into any of these environments, or through a VPN that they're accessing through the actual devices and backhauling through the internet. Now, why is this important specifically that I mentioned about identity? It becomes quite important, I think, especially when it comes to phishing. Now, phishing, I really don't care what anyone else seems to think these days. And I've seen some people which are naive enough to say that, no, phishing is no longer a huge thing. I think it's gotten worse. And in fact, I think it gets worse and worse every day. Now, generally, if you're savvy enough to be able to identify some kind of phishing attack or campaign, you would be able to look at the actual URL and go, well, that doesn't look like Office 365, right? So generally what we would do is we have obviously multiple different ways of being able to do this, looking at threat prevention, URL filtering, and also having the credential or anti-theft, credential theft prevention on the device itself, on the actual firewalls themselves. Now, also the nice thing behind it is because we are a machine learning capable device from PanaOS 10.0, we have the ability of being able to take us a little further than just identifying what the URL is. We can strip the entire website itself and see, well, okay, cool, what's the URL? Once I try and log into the actual environment, what does it actually do in the backend? What does it try to redirect me to? Does this website actually look like what Office 365 looks like? What is the reputation of the domain? What is the reputation of the business that, part of the copyright infringement on the actual environment? This is where we get more involved and we strip it and see exactly what's going on to be able to identify whether this is a phishing campaign or not. So a great example of this is that if we, I know a lot of us are guilty in that, is that we may use the same password that we do in our offices as we do on Facebook and LinkedIn and the rest of it. So what if one of those social media websites gets targeted and there is some kind of credential theft that may have happened in this? So in this example, we could have Bob again that may have clicked could have had their specific credential stolen from a social media website. Now, they obviously want to try and log in to their corporate environment, or in this example, they may have gotten some kind of phishing link. Someone sent it to them and said, well, Bob, here's your new payslip. Can you make sure that your payslip is correct? Or we're about to process this order. Please click this link and make sure that everything's okay. This customer's waiting. Quickly do it. Now, naturally, human panic is going to make Bob click that button. Now, using the credential or anti-credential theft protection on the device is that because we have the ability of being able to strip that website, is that when we click the link and we go to this website, we as humans may look at this and go, well, that website kind of looks like our intranet and our organizational website that we use to look at our invoices or our CRM system, whatever it is. We may still want to put in our credentials behind it. Now, what we do is with the anti-credential theft prevention on it, is that when we put in our corporate details into it, well, we can strip the entire website and see, because we're obviously integrated into our internal IDP using user ID, we can immediately see, well, Bob's trying to use his corporate credentials to access this dodgy website, so block the access to it immediately. Something very important is that we do not keep any of these credentials on the devices whatsoever. It is all hashes. We don't keep anything in clear text. So no, because we're integrated into the IDP, we obviously have the ability of seeing, well, is this your correct details for this website? This website does not look like a corporate website. So that's something nice that we use for the credential, anti-credential theft. Other side of it is successful credential reuse. So in that example is that, well, what if someone gets access to my credentials, for example, and they try to access my corporate website? What we could do is obviously have full integration into multiple different multi-factor authentication providers as well. So whether it is the soft key tokens, the hardware tokens, the SOML providers or SSO providers like Okta and PingID, for example, so that if someone who has my stolen credentials tries to access my corporate environment, it immediately challenges us and sends, because we're integrated into the firewall as well as the MFA side of things, is that it'll immediately tell the user, listen, something is going on here. Was this you that tried to log in? So an example, Carl, you're now sitting in Johannesburg and, oh no, Carl, you're trying to log in from Singapore. Is that you? No, I'm sitting in Cape Town right now. So why would I get access to that thing from Singapore? So immediately it would be able to see, well, this is not you trying to do anything, and I would obviously not allow that response on my MFA app, for example. And because obviously we're doing anti-theft, credential theft and stuff on it, we strip the website, and if we made a oopsie on the inside here, that it doesn't necessarily allow that type of traffic, which is quite good. Now, it's all great that we're talking about these applications, is that, well, once I get user ID and I have the ability to be able to look at who that user is and what device that user is, whatever it is that we also need to be able to identify applications, right? Because we don't believe in doing the older UTM type of things or proxy type things where we are doing a legacy type of firewall, where we're doing control based on services or ports, so 443, 25, or HTTP, SMTP, POP, whatever it is. We are an application, we're a new generation firewall, right? We want to do it based on applications because there are thousands of applications that can run on a single port at the end of the day. So great ways of being able to do this is we need to be able to identify what is sanctioned, so something is us as an organization sees as an actual valid application that we use on a day-to-day basis versus what is tolerated. So something that we will allow in our business, but obviously do extra security on top of it, or something that is completely unsanctioned. So a Facebook or a YouTube that we do not use in our organization, and we either block it or we do a lot more security tolerance on top of it. Now, this is where we have the ability to do this type of application control on the actual device. Now, we keep talking about applications, and it's great that we have this ability to, because we're a machine learning firewall, we're constantly looking at the stream and not just at the packets, so we're constantly learning about those applications, seeing it's not just Facebook, it is Facebook chats, Facebook chat uploads and downloads, whatever it is. And so we also have a cool little visibility dashboard on the firewalls called ACC, or the Application Control Center. It gives us the ability of looking at what the active sessions are, past sessions are, who the users are that access these multiple different applications, where are they going, where they're coming from. Another side of it is having the ability of looking at SaaS environments and what the usage is behind these different SaaS environments. What I mean by that is where we look at the tolerated versus unsanctioned and the sanctioned applications out there, is that, well, I only see G Suite as a sanctioned application group for my business. So Google Drive and Gmail, whatever it is. In that case, why are my users getting access to Evernote and Jive and SurveyMonkey? Those are unsanctioned applications of my business. We also have the ability of being able to look further and deeper into this, is that, well, which of these SaaS providers that my users are getting access to have poor terms of service? They naturally don't, obviously from a security perspective, they have no compliance behind of it. They have terrible financial visibility. They have had data breaches in the past, or continuous data breaches. Why are my users getting access to these applications, and who are these users? How much of their data they're actually using, which becomes quite a larger discussion later on, right? Now, this is where we also, quite importantly, have the ability of not just looking at applications based on what those sub-applications are as well, but having a look at how we control these applications based on certain categories. Now, I could see it as a social media type website, whether it's Facebook, whether it's LinkedIn, whatever it is, whether it's gaming, whether it's going to Steam or Origin, for example, whatever it is. Also have the ability of looking at these SaaS characteristics in the previous slide as well, seeing their poor terms of services and whatever they have in the background. But something that's really important behind all of this is also being able to do the control based on its function. So an example of this is like Dropbox. I want my users to be able to download from our corporate Dropbox account, but I don't want them to upload anything. So anything that they put in their Dropbox file or directly on their machines, I don't want them to upload or synchronize it to the corporate environment. And why I say that's important is that I've seen in years of experience that a lot of users take movies and songs and their personal photos and put it into their corporate Dropbox account, and then it takes up the corporate allocated space in that account. So in that case, we obviously have the ability of being able to do the control based on an upload, download, what is the document, the type of document that's going to be shared across that type of SaaS environment. We have the ability of doing the data classification on it as well. Is it a Teams meeting? Are they sharing the screen? Are they doing some kind of remote support on that application? Can we block that specific subcategory on the device as well, which is quite interesting. Now, something that's important and something that we do quite well is we give customers the ability of being able to mirror their corporate governance business policy onto the actual firewall itself. So obviously, in this example, having the ability of grouping the security policies based on business policies. So only certain groups get access to certain applications and websites, which is quite important. And obviously, naturally, allocating certain actions to those specific identity providers that we've obviously integrated into, and obviously based on what applications we're allowing and not allowing. Something that's also quite important as well is being able to obviously do a little bit more in-depth analysis on the actual application. Something like this which is quite important, and I think quite controversial in a lot of organizations, is the ability of looking inside of encrypted traffic. So naturally looking at TLS decryption as well. Now, this is something that was quite an interesting subject last year when we brought out PanOS 10.0 with the machine learning functionality on it, is that we had brought out TLS decryption or inspection on the devices back then, where our competition had claimed that they could do TLS decryption on 1.3 as well, where they couldn't. So in that case, an example like this is looking at more than 80% of the traffic that users get access to today is encrypted. Now that's quite a problem because a lot of these bad guys are starting to take advantage of this. They encrypt their own payloads and they obviously inject it into traffic, where if firewalls or anything in the environment does not have the ability of doing the TLS decryption on the traffic to look at the bad things and obviously prevent the bad things, then half of that stuff is passed through, or obviously naturally more than 80% of the stuff is now being passed through that the firewall should have been able to prevent before. Now, like I mentioned, when we brought out PanOS 10.0, we brought out the ability of doing TLS 1.3 decryption on the firewalls, where our competitors claimed that they could do it. Where that was actually quite a lot of rubbish, to be quite honest with you, is that they couldn't do native decryption on 1.3. What they did was they downgraded the version to a 1.2 or a 1.1, for example. So what they did was they downgraded their customer security in order to do the decryption, where we have native TLS 1.3 decryption on the devices and that was last year already on PanOS 10.0. Something that's quite important. And obviously behind this as well, which becomes quite a huge topic, is that, well, does this align to my business policy, specifically from a privacy perspective and governance perspective? Again, this is something that can be configured and customized as well, is that we could obviously bypass decryption on financial traffic, whether it's banking, whether it's healthcare, whatever it is, so that we don't do the decryption. And it's already default policies already when you enable TLS decryption with devices. Again, you can configure that or customize it. Right, so where is the protection actually done on the policies? So it's cool that we can mirror these policies according to our business policies, but how do we enable the security on the devices? So obviously a customer's got URL filtering, they've got wildfire, they've got the threat prevention on it. All of these different profiles that have been created can get added to the different security policies that we have in the business, which is quite nice. Now, something that's quite important is obviously how we mentioned that we can do the central management, whether it is from a physical firewall, a VM, whether it's Prism Access. Obviously, also we have Cortex XDR. We got the public cloud from a Prisma cloud perspective, or anything that's infrastructure as a service. We also have the ability of looking at Cortex Data Lake, which is something we mentioned the Cortex side of it as well, which is our central logging repository and analysis that we can do from any point of our environment. So remember, we spoke about this consistency and full integration. Well, this is where we can take all of our products and integrate it all together to have the ability of being able to analyze the traffic and obviously prevent anything that does happen in the environment. Now, something that's quite important I want to talk about is we have multiple different post-sales and I suppose to a certain degree pre-sales tools that we can run for multiple different customers. So one being the SLR service security lifecycle review, which is taking a Palo Alto device, physical and virtual, putting it into a customer's environment, into a mirrored or a tap port on a switch, where we can flood that traffic into the firewall to be able to pull a report for the customer to show them what is the security vulnerabilities and gaps in the current solution that they're using in the environment. So we can show them the IoT visibility, DNS security, we can show them application visibility, what are the users doing from a SaaS perspective, everything. So that we can show the customer that if they buy a Palo Alto device, what is the protection they can get out of it, which is quite nice. The other side of it is, what if the customer's already got a firewall, a Palo Alto firewall? Can we do something similar? Yes. We've got something called the best practice assessment, or BPA, which is something that can get pulled as well for the customer, where we can show them what their adoption is to the certain subscription that they are running on those firewalls. So are they running wildfire? Are they running URL filtering? What is the percentage of the configured best practices versus the Palo Alto best practices, as well as the industry or vertical best practices? So if it is a medical environment, how do they compare to their own industry versus the Palo Alto best practices as well? And you as the partner can also add this as a value-added service that is part of your managed services to the customers, to show them how you, when managing their firewalls, how you have taken them from a 0% on wildfire, for example, to a 70% protection on the environment, which is quite nice as well. And the other side of it is we can look at expedition. If a customer has now moved to a Palo Alto firewall and they were on a competitor firewall, we can use expedition to convert a FortiGate or a Checkpoint or a Juniper firewall config to a Palo Alto config. So the minute they plug that firewall in, they get the protection that they used to have, but in a Palo Alto format, which is quite nice. The other side of it is they could also look at Iron Skillet, which gives them day one best practice config on the device. So if they want to start from scratch or they've never had anything in their environment, you can run Iron Skillet to give them the best practice protection on their device for their environment in day one, which is quite nice. The other side of it is looking at Policy Optimizer, which is a tool on the firewalls themselves, where some customers may still be running protection, even on the Palo Alto gateways, where they are running their security policies based on 443 and whatever it is based on services and not applications, where the Policy Optimizer could look at it and go, well, these are the applications that have been seeing in the past few days on that specific policy. And what it does is it converts a policy by a click and a convert to add or convert that policy from a normal service type policy to an application-based policy to do proper application identification and control on those policies. So Policy Optimizer is already on the firewalls, which is quite nice. Right, PanOS 10.1, which was launched quite early this year. Hopefully, some of you may have attended the actual launch behind it. There were a lot of things that have been brought into, like policy brokers or VPN concentrated type of technologies. One being the cloud identity thing, which we'll talk about now, as well as the SaaS inline subscription, which was added, which I spoke about in the beginning. One of them, which I wanted to cover, was the cloud identity engine, which is quite a nice thing if you're looking at as well. So we've always, like I mentioned, had the ability of doing anti-credential theft prevention, doing dynamic group policies as well to add some kind of automation in, depending on type of tags on the firewalls, having the ability of obviously being able to identify those users based on user ID, no matter what those identity providers were. And this is something that was quite important, right? Is that many years ago, any organization really just had an on-prem AD, whether it was Microsoft, Linux, LDAP, Apple LDAP, whether it was eDirectory, Novell eDirectory, whatever it was quite easy to manage, right? One profile that could manage that identity. Where today, multiple different customers could have Okta, they could have Ping ID, they could have Azure AD, they could have on-prem AD and LDAP as well. And it's quite a problem to actually manage this, because on each one of these devices that you have in your environment, the firewalls, whether it's something that sits in the cloud, is that you would have to have multiple different identity profiles behind it. And the problem is a lot of this wasn't necessarily synced. So you would have to constantly manage or manually manage all of these different authentication profiles on these devices to be able to keep up with the changes in these ID providers. Now, this is where in Intended One, we launched something called the Cloud Identity Engine, which is a single SaaS cloud-provided environment that has the ability of synchronizing and integrating all of these different providers into one single point. So that means whether it is an on-prem AD, whether it is Azure AD or any of the other SSO or SORML providers, they all integrate into the Cloud Identity Engine. Now, the only profile or anything from an IDP perspective or a user ID perspective on any of these devices that can be configured is essentially one profile that is configured for the Cloud Identity Engine. So from an investment protection, this becomes quite easy. Is that I don't have to get another device and I don't have to get multiple different SaaS provider type of things to try and integrate this and synchronize everything. It's just one thing that controls the multiple different IDPs in one single location, and everything is synchronized into one single point, which is quite nice. So that means nothing ever really has to get changed on any of the cloud environments, the firewalls, virtual, whether it's Prism Access, no matter what it is, which is quite nice. Right, so Prism Access is quite important as well. Naturally, a lot of customers look at some kind of, well, we don't want a firewalling type of thing or a physical firewall. We want a proxy type of protection, right? And the problem is when they start looking at these type of proxy preventions, whether it even is a hosted type of environment, is that it generally has really terrible app visibility. And it's not just the app visibility and coverage behind it, is that it doesn't completely protect every single one of the applications out there. It only does, like a proxy does, prevent a basic web type, any basic type of ICMP type traffic, which is a problem. So that user experience becomes quite a huge problem, especially when you're moving from a remote user to a branch. And this is where Prism Access takes things a little bit different, is that we're a cloud delivered next generation firewall. So that means that, again, whether you're sitting at the branch or whether you're a remote user, you get protected on every single one of the applications out there, like a true next generation firewall. Whether it is web, ICMP, doesn't matter what it is. And that's the best thing about it, is you get full coverage on it, whether you're a remote user or a user sitting in a branch, which is quite nice. Now, this is where we bring in something called SASE. Now, SASE is one of these new buzzwords that Gartner obviously had coined out there, which is a secure access service edge. A lot of these vendors have got different versions behind this, but what it really is at the end of the day, no matter what any of them say, is that it takes two very key components within any kind of environment, right? One of them is the network security or network service layer, as well as the security service layer. So in that case, being the ability of me being able to connect to the internet and accessing an application, or while I'm doing that, having the security behind it. Now, how do we do that from a Palo Alto perspective? Well, one, the network security or network service layer behind it is that we can provide it through an SD-WAN solution, both on the actual firewall itself, as well as the CloudGenix or Prisma SD-WAN side, which is something I'll cover a little bit later. Or even if a customer already has a Prisma, a Riverbed or a cloud, they've already got the older CloudGenix, whatever it is, or they got the Meraki's, or they got Viptellus, whatever it is, they've already got that network service layer. So how do we provide them the security service layer behind it to give them the complete SASE solution of that? Well, in that case, obviously Prism Access comes into that to be able to do that. Again, they don't have to do it in two different technologies. we can provide them a full SASE solution by giving them the Prisma SD-WAN as well as Prisma Access. So that encompasses the entire service layer behind it. Now, obviously, we've been doing Prisma Access for quite a long time, and we've upgraded Prisma Access for quite a while now. We're not sitting on Prisma Access 2.0 anymore, but I wanted to bring 2.0 out there because a lot of users out there still don't necessarily understand what the big difference was from our previous versions to what we did from 2.0 onwards to 2.1 and 2.2. So in that case, what did we introduce? So previously, we just had the ability of being able to, we had to buy a panorama in order to do any Prisma Access management. Yes, we had the ability, we had the cloud management portal, but it wasn't necessarily done too well, if I'm honest with you. So in that case, what we've done is from Prisma Access 2.0 onwards is that we've given customers the ability of being able to manage their Prisma Access environment through either the cloud native portal as a SaaS portal where they can do their security policies and everything, or they can do it through Panorama. So an example of that is, well, what if I don't have physical firewalls and VMs that I need to look after and I just have Prisma Access? Well, they can just do the Prisma Access policy management through the cloud portal that they get. Or what if I got physical appliances and VMs and Prisma Access and I want to integrate it all into one single platform? In that case, they could obviously look at Panorama as the central management suite, one single interface that manages physical, virtual, CN series, as well as the Prisma Access side as well, which is quite nice. Now, the best thing about this is that a lot of managed service providers, as well as customers out there, naturally the biggest problem is finger pointing, right? Well, customer, there's a problem on your site, it's your internet, it's something on your machines when you access applications. And obviously the customers are pointing back, right? Well, how do we alleviate this? Now, Prisma Access 2.0 onwards, we introduced something called ADEM, or Autonomous Digital Experience Management, which effectively brings in a lot more synthetic type traffic visibility and testing into this environment. Now, what's nice about this is obviously when we connect into Prisma Access using the Global Protect agent, is that in the Prisma Access solution with this ADEM technology, we can pinpoint exactly where in the connection where the problem lies, even to a CPU level. So when I click a link to Salesforce, for example, or something that's sitting in my data center, where is the actual problem in that application? So it will tell me it's hanging on the CPU with a certain process, or there's something wrong from my NIC on my laptop to the Wi-Fi router that I'm connecting to, or to the service provider's router, or even into Prisma Access into the cloud provider, for example. So we get that complete visibility through ADEM, which is quite nice. Then we can pinpoint exactly where something went wrong. So none of this finger pointing anymore. The other side of it is that the machine learning functionality that we brought into PanOS 10.0 on our VM series and CN series and the physical firewalls, we've brought into the Prisma Access side as well. The other side of it is, I spoke about that we don't want to do the proxy solution as well, right? Which is quite important. Something that customers were looking at, well, what if we want to migrate from our existing solution into Prisma Access slowly and not do this big bang approach? So in that case, we brought out the Prisma Access Cloud Secure Web Gateway. So in that case, if customers are moving from an existing solution, they can use an explicit proxy type solution to slowly migrate into Prisma Access. And once they've slowly moved the users into it using the software gateway, they can immediately flip over to a full Prisma Access solution, get rid of the web gateway functionality, and do the proper next generation firewall as a service behind it. But again, we've got that as a functionality for customers. Huge disclaimer, don't run it all the time. I mean, the whole point of Prisma Access is to migrate them into a proper next generation firewall as a service, right? Again, very important is that when we introduced IoT security in 10.0, onto the actual firewall devices, VM series, hardware appliances, we now have it in Prisma Access as well. So full visibility of IoT as well as the enforcement through Prisma Access. The other side of it is integrating cloud blades that we had as well, which is essentially integration into multiple different third-party providers. So an example of that is Authenticate, Menlo, and Ericom. They provide remote browser isolation. So almost like almost like a dumb client type of solution like internet cafes used to do. We have the ability of integrating it to multiple third parties using API integration as well, which is quite nice. Now, the other side of it is that we obviously brought in quite a lot of performance enhancements through the different Prisma Access versions as well. So it's actually getting quicker, better, which is quite nice. The other side of it, which is our Prisma SD-WAN side of things. So I was talking about SASE, where we bring in the security service layer as well as the network security service layer. In this case, we acquired a technology called CloudGenix, which was a next generation SD-WAN provider. Now, what does that actually mean? So when we start talking about our full SASE providing thing where we bring it to Prism Access and our CloudGenix, which we had before, there was a reason for us doing this. Yes, we could give a customer one single platform on the firewall that does SD-WAN and security, but if a customer wants the best firewall as well as the best SD-WAN technology, this is the case to go for it. Now, what is a next generation SD-WAN? SD-WAN is relatively new, right? Not necessarily, because, and I've worked for many years in SD-WAN when it first came out, and it really just took equal cost multipath and policy-based routing to a slightly more advanced level, where it was just looking at packet loss and latency and jitter on the actual link. So great-ish to be able to do very basic application intelligence to look at, well, I can't reach an application based on certain packet loss on that link, so move it across another link. But the problem with that is it leads to other issues. That big issue behind it is the visibility into multiple different applications. Every application has its own performance metrics in the way that it handles traffic based on client and server. So packet loss, latency, and jitter is not going to be enough. And we need something to have the ability of being able to look further into it and really doing something a little bit more intelligent. So in this case, we look at latency, packet loss, and jitter, but we also look into every single application, because VoIP is dealt with differently to how video is dealt with, how SMTP is dealt with versus normal SSL traffic, for example. So everything has got its own performance application session management that we get visibility into using Prisma SD-WAN. And in that case, the nice thing about it is obviously great that we can get the visibility behind it and looking at performance, is that we also do things a little bit different, where other SD-WAN providers rely on this two-prong approach, where they have one appliance that sits at every single branch and then the appliance sitting at the data center. So what a lot of these different SD-WAN type of technologies do is they flood everything, so the spray and pray type of thing. And then they would have to have another appliance that sits on the other side so that it could reconstruct the whole TCP scenario again, because they've blasted all the application traffic across all of the links. The other device on the other side has to repackage everything into something and sanitize everything to make sure that the server or the client gets the correct type of traffic. That was the wrong way of doing things. Now, because we have the visibility and being able to monitor all of these different application metrics, is that we also don't need multiple different appliances. We can have one appliance that sits on one side, so we don't have to do the spray and pray thing, which is quite cool. So which obviously takes us to a different era, right? Now, we've obviously got multiple different appliances in order to do this SD-WAN type thing. We call our appliances ION appliances, and obviously we range from the 1K appliance to the 9K appliance, which caters for obviously the smaller branches to the larger data center type of appliances. Multiple different subscriptions based on obviously the link sizes as well, which is quite important. And obviously the different form factors having multiple different interfaces, so from your 1 gigs, 10 gigs, SFPs, SFP plus, for example, as well. Sorry, I'm rushing a little bit here. I'm very cognizant of time. I'm still going to do the Kahoot thingy here. Now, the other side that I wanted to bring in quite quickly was the PA400 series, which is quite nice. So we've basically gotten to a point where we can replace the PA220s, which was a smaller appliance, but really, quite honestly, quite expensive. In this example, we brought out the PA400 series from the 410, 440, 450, and 460, which directly competes even against our 220. The smallest appliance now, the 410, beats the 220 that we had before on cost as well as performance. In fact, even to a degree where the entire 400 series competes against our competitors based on performance and cost as well, very comparatively, which is quite nice. Obviously, having the ability of being able to wall rack mount it, desktop rack mount it, whatever it is also a fanless type of environment. So if it needs to be packed under a desk, there's no fan, especially from a redundancy perspective, rugged perspective as well. So if there's a lot of dust in the environment, it doesn't affect the performance on the devices. And more importantly is that even though it is smaller, it doesn't necessarily mean that we are going to have lower performance on it. In fact, I'll show you the performance behind it. It is still an ML-powered next-generation firewall that has the ability of having all of the subscriptions loaded on the actual firewalls themselves. So a good example of this is the smallest device, now the PA410, which is much cheaper than the PA220, is much quicker than the PA220, and naturally stacking up on all of the different appliances as well. Something quite important as well is the actual PA410s as well, is that the logging is not done on the actual device itself. It gets done, the logging gets done into the actual cloud, obviously alleviating the storage on the actual device. With the other devices further up have hardware on the actual, hard drives on the machines to be able to keep the logs on the devices, as well as redundant power supplies from the 440, 50s, and 60s, and not on the 410. It's a much smaller sort of desktop type of appliance. Right, so that is the presentation very quickly in a nutshell from my side. Lindsay, do you want to jump onto the Kahoots?
Yes. But as you load the Kahoot, so just go to your browsers on your second device, preferably your mobile phone, and just dial kahoot.it. So obviously the 3 winners will win the vouchers, but there was another term, or should I say a condition on this series that we had, this 2-part series for our partners, to say, even if you don't win one of these vouchers, we also extend it to say, before the 31st of October, if you manage to set up a meeting with a customer and have that converted into a due registration, you as the salesperson can get a $100 voucher. So I still have more vouchers to give away. And you've got 1.5 weeks. If you can still set up a meeting with one of your customers, and we can do the presentation on Palo Alto and everything, and then just try to unearth an opportunity with your customer. So here's our game pin for today. So you can log in and we can get going with the game.
That's it, yeah. And please, everyone, if you can use your, I see a lot of people coming in, please use your normal names so we can obviously allocate the prizes to the correct people.
Yeah.
And not, Star Trek and Star Wars names.
If you're having any challenges, please let us know on chat. We are patient, we'll wait for you.
You still can't see my screen, right, Lindsay?
Yes, you can see your screen.
Cool.
Yeah.
Just in case, we're telling people to look at the pin and I'm not even showing it.
Yeah, no, the pin is there, 7489959. If you're having any challenges joining the game, please let us know on chat or just raise your hand. Is there anyone else still trying to connect? Anyone else having a challenge?
Yep.
Yeah,
Lost someone.
He just joined. I think that was Chico that we lost it. He's now rejoining. Okay, he's now back. Are you joining, Samuel? Kelvin, are you joining? Should we wait or should we proceed? There's a hand up. Hi, Avan. Are you having challenges?
Lindsay, I'm not joining.
Okay. Okay, I think we can start because the other guys are saying they're having challenges and all.
Okay, cool. Cool, all right, well, let's get started. Okay, so just as a reminder, if you have played or you haven't played, there will be two different types of questions. So one could be a true or false, obviously a statement, and you choose whether that statement is true or false. And the other one being a quiz, where it could be one single correct answer or multiple correct answers that you could choose from. Right, so I think let's get started in 3, 2, 1. Right, first question. Okay, quiz. New features introduced with PanOS 10.1. Okay, 3 seconds. Quickly get to those answers. Right, so one of the correct answers that you could have chosen was either the SaaS inline subscription, which was brought out into 10.1, or the Cloud Identity Engine, which is one of the ones that we covered. IoT security was brought out in PanOS 10.0 last year sometime, so definitely not 10.1. Let's have a look at the scoreboard. Okay, so don't get any shocks yet. Obviously, we've got about 9 questions left, so this is going to change quite a lot. Very important is that the quickest correct answer is the one that gets the most points as well. So next question in 3, 2, 1. True or false? Anti-credential theft always remembers your password. I was quite explicit when I mentioned this. That's correct. So I can't say that, right? The correct answer is false. Yes. So no, the anti-credential theft solution that we have on the firewalls does not remember your password. It is just hashes. We do have integration with obviously using user ID into the IDPs, but we don't remember any of those passwords whatsoever. A bit of a change to the leaderboard. Remember, try and be quick and correct at the same time. So next question in 3, 2, 1. What percentage of user traffic is encrypted? Remember that little green graph, the pie chart? Correct. So in the slide that we have, globally around more than 80% of user traffic today is encrypted. So that's where we mentioned the TLS 1.3 decryption that we do on the firewalls. Awesome, some nice choppings and changings again. What a good highest answer score streak there as well. Don't worry about it, don't panic, keep going. Trust me, there's still 7 questions to go. You still got a lot of chance. Next question in 3, 2, 1. Post-sales tools to help customers improve their security.
I still have my money on the ladies.
Cool. So any one of the 3 would have been correct. So it was the expedition for the config conversion from a competitor, policy optimizer to move from the legacy service type of thing to the application policies, the best practice assessment, and one of the other ones was Iron Skillet for day 1 best practice config, as well as the SLR or security lifecycle review if we could do it customers as well. Lots of chopping and changing. I'm liking it.
The ladies
Lots of
are what?
competition.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see so. Okay, next one in 3, 2, 1. True or false? SASE is the convergence of both network and cloud layers. Trick question. Okay, awesome. Good job, everybody. Yes, there was a very false statement. It is the convergence of network service layer as well as the security service layer. So it could be obviously the CloudGenix or Prism SD-WAN as well as Prism Access side of things. No change.
Is it calculated?
I'm sure it did. Yeah, I think there was just no change. Okay, that's weird. Okay, next question in 3, 2, 1. Next. Right, what are the names of the Prism SD-WAN appliances? We did it right in the beginning. Oh, right, no one answered it correctly. Yeah, thanks. It was right in the end, those silver boxes that we had. Yes, so the correct answer is the ION devices. There we go. We got some chopping and changing. Okay, we've got 4 questions left. In 3, 2, 1, go. True or false? For next generation SD-WAN, packet loss, latency, and jitter are enough for monitoring. Next generation keyword, right? Not the legacy SD-WAN. Right, so yes, very important. It is not enough. Obviously, every application is monitored and managed completely differently, and they act completely differently, right? So yes, definitely a false statement. Nice. Okay, 3 more questions left, everyone. Take a quick deep breath there before we get to the next one.
And the ladies are both at the top.
I see so, yeah. In 3, 2, 1, go. True or false? Unlike a proxy solution, Prism Access protects all applications. Correct. It does protect all applications where proxy type solutions only really do web-based traffic, right? HTTP, HTTPS, and certain ICMP type traffic as well.
Everyone got it correct, but it's an issue of timing.
That's it. It's the quickest finger. Quickest finger. All right. 2 questions left. 3, 2, 1. Whiz. What is the name of the new powerful ML-powered next generation firewalls? It's one of the last slides. Correct. The new ML-powered next-generation firewalls, besides the 5450, which is one of the bigger boxes we launched out, was the P400 Series, so P410 for 40, 50, and 60 if we brought out. So yes, that is correct. Next. Big changes again. Still very close, by the way.
Yeah.
We have 1 question left. So this is really going to be taken down to the quickest finger, I think, on this one.
I hope it was an easy question, the last one.
I can't remember, to be honest with you, so so I hope everyone paid attention. Okay, 3, 2, 1, go. What makes ML Wildfire unique? The machine learning Wildfire specifically, the new one. So I'm glad everyone got that right, at least. So no, it's not a buzzword.
Time, yeah, yeah.
That's it, yeah. So obviously, remember, we moved from the boasted and we used to brag about less than 5 minutes. It's moved to real time now, which is amazing. And that's on the device itself, no longer just a cloud provided solution, which is quite nice. Well, is everyone ready to look at the scoreboard? On the podium, 3rd place. Melvin, well done. 2nd, not even 4th, 300 points. Not even 100 points separated from 2nd and 1st. Well done.